Welcome to part 2 of a mini-series on how to stop spinning when you're driving your virtual race car. As in part 1, thanks to GT Omega for supporting this guide. They sell a range of racing cockpits spanning all budgets, from wheel stands right through to full aluminium rigs such as the Prime rig that I use, as well as gaming chairs, desks, backpacks and all sorts. Check out their stuff and get a 5% discount using the code DANNYLEE. In the previous video, we took a general look at how spins are caught and killed with some visualizations to help you. In this video, I'll talk more about how to prevent them in the first place, and more often than not, the accident begins on corner entry, so we'll focus on that. As before, in this guide I am trying to frame things in a way that may help you if nothing else has, not give you hardcore physics. Don't use any of this for your motorsport dynamics coursework. Race cars are set up with the ability to turn very aggressively if you ask them to, but this also means that it's easy for you to accidentally use too much of that ability too soon in the corner and suffer a spin, whether that's turning too sharply, braking too hard whilst turning, or being too sudden with your actions overall. When grip is lost at the rear, it's difficult to get it back even if you know what to do as described in the part 1 video, so learning how to safely approach the limit is going to help you. If you're often holding your breath and hoping for the best on corner entry, then chances are you're not being calm and controlled enough for your car, and indeed for yourself as a human being with all of the associated human reflexes, or lack thereof. Your car is very capable, but it is blind. It cannot see what's coming up ahead or when, and if you don't give it a little bit of warning, it can unexpectedly reach and surpass its limit of grip. This means that you need to help your car brace itself for what you are about to do, and in return it will be more controllable. Have a think back to the last time you were standing up on a bus. Now, on a bus, if you stood up, you're going to be holding onto a pole. And as the bus turns left or right, you're going to sense that it's starting to turn, and you would tighten your grip on the pole so that you could brace yourself against any left or right turning forces so that you can stay upright and have a smooth ride. So a bus turns left, you grip and you hold on. Bus turns right, you grip, you hold on. So what if your bus driver is rubbish and they make horrible, nasty, erratic, jolty turns that give you no warning whatsoever to tighten your grip on the pole to brace yourself? Well, you're going to be thrown about left, right and centre. Your arm's going to be yanked to bits. You're not going to enjoy that ride, and you could lose grip of the pole altogether. Your race car has to react similarly to your controls and commands, so it will treat you better when you give it that same courtesy by letting it lean over onto its outside wheels in a controlled way before you start pushing it harder. Although this might sound like you need to do it slowly, that's not the case. It's still a process that happens quickly, but it's the shape and timing of your inputs that really matter. In this phase, the car is at its most nervous, transitioning from a settled state, driving straight ahead with no lean, to a new settled state, turning a corner with maximum lean. Let's go and look at an example that can show us a pretty clear template of what I'm talking about. Copse Corner at Silverstone. I'll show it in real time first, then we'll slow it down afterwards and break down how my cornering behaviour works to make it safe every single time. In Copse Corner, as in most fast corners, there's usually a need to scrub off some speed just before turning in, so that is the first thing we have to do. As I hit the marker for starting the corner, I press the brakes reasonably briskly to chop off some speed. But as I do this, I'm only turning the steering wheel a very small amount, almost nothing. This is because sharp braking and sharp turning at the same moment of impact at a corner like Copse will almost always end up like this. So we return to our example of how you should do it safely, and after the initial hard braking phase, however long or short that might be, we now need to start turning the car into the corner properly and enter the trail braking phase of the turn. This is when you fade down the brake pedal to smaller amounts as you twist your steering wheel into the turn, and this is where the trouble is if you're too aggressive and sharp. At this exact moment, I could use more steering and the car will turn more, but that's the thing, the car's not ready for it yet, it's not settled enough yet, and the result could be a spin. This phase of the corner is all about leaning the car over, so this phase should feel like you're curling the car towards the corner apex rather than pointing it or throwing it. Once the car has finished shifting its weight over to the outside and is stable, and you'll get better at sensing this moment with practice and with good equipment, we can now turn the steering wheel a bit more and push the front tyres harder because the car is now ready for it, it's braced for it. We're now in the mid-corner phase where the car is compressed over on its outside tyres. Even if it's hard to tell by eye, it's definitely happening. This phase could last a long time if you're in a long, never-ending corner like turn 1 at Lime Rock, but in the case of Copse, this phase is over quite quickly. In this brief moment, I'm now using all the grip the front tyres can give me, and I'm relying on prior experience and the information coming through my force feedback to sense how much steering angle the front tyres can cope with. Up until this point in the corner, I was not steering as hard as the front tyres could go because the rest of the car, namely the rear tyres, would not be able to hold on. With turn-in completed and the mid-corner phase reached without binning it, I can start getting on the power and come away from the corner, but that's a whole different subject for another time. In essence, every time you turn in there is a squish phase and a squash phase. The squish is the time it takes for the car to lean over to the outside as it changes from driving straight to turning in, making the car's weight shift over. The squash is when you sense the car has now compressed and settled enough to turn harder, and you can steer more aggressively. Race cars love to drive in a straight line, and they also love to drive around corners as hard as possible. It's just the bit in between those two states that requires you to take extra care. You have to be controlled and calm on corner entry. As much as you want to be aggressive and drive faster through sheer will, it's not the way to go. The speed at which the squish happens depends on what car you're in. Soft and floaty cars, relatively speaking at least, take more time to complete that initial squish phase. Stiff, light cars with high downforce tend to have a very fast squish, which makes them much more agile but take more accuracy and fast reflexes to control. The reason that turn-in is such a dangerous moment is because of balance. As touched on in the part 1 video, in this context the front end of your car has the job of changing your direction. That is what it does. The rear end of your car has the job of keeping the whole thing stable as it changes direction. This is basically a constantly shifting power struggle, and the balance teeters back and forth as the weight at each end changes. Here's a top-down view of our race car. These two blobs represent the balance of grip that the front and rear of the car have on a track. Normally race cars are built to be evenly balanced wherever possible. There are plenty of exceptions, but this is a good rule to go by. When the two blobs are closely matched and the grip at each end is equal, the car can be considered balanced and will be stable. If the front and rear end were to have an arm wrestle in this balanced state, neither would easily win. When the rear end is stronger, you get understeer, but when the front end is stronger, you get oversteer and it's easy to spin. When you brake, the balance of grip shifts to the front of the car, and so the front end enjoys a boost. At the same time, the rear of the car suffers a loss of grip as the weight tips forward, leaving the rear tyres with less force pushing them down into the track. Now there's an imbalance of power that heavily favours the front, and if you then allow the front end to turn into a corner as hard as possible in this unbalanced state, the front end would easily overpower the rear end. When the rear end cannot hang on as well as the front end can, that's when you spin. In this unbalanced state, the front end would smash the rear end easily in an arm wrestle. This is what makes corner entry so tricky, and this is why you have to step in and control how much power the front end is allowed to use to change the direction of the car, and you do this by controlling your steering. When you brake and turn into a corner, the rear is stripped of a lot of that downward pressure, making the tyres stick to the track, but the inside rear tyre suffers the most, almost as if the whole car is leaning forward and lifting its near side butt cheek. Well, A bit like trying to let out some nervous wind in a quiet exam room, it's more likely to end well if you lean and lift in a controlled and smooth manner rather than an aggressive jolt. The point is, this tyre can't contribute much grip at the rear if it's not making good contact with the ground, and a surefire way to tear grip away from that tyre is to cause the whole car to lurch by cornering and braking too hard at the same time, and that leaves the other rear tyre with all the work to do to keep your car stable, as the more powerful front end pulls it into the corner. When I drive, I'm always visualising in my mind that inside rear being unloaded or unweighted when I turn in, and just hanging onto the track by its little finger. My aim is always to avoid ripping that one last fingernail of grip off the track under that one tyre. I know that if I twist and nosedive the car too suddenly and violently into corners, the rears can't do their job of keeping the car stable. Alright, so I'm aware this video is just a really long way of saying just be smoother, but what I'm trying to do is give you ways to build mental, metaphorical links between what you're doing and what you see on screen and feel through the wheel and pedals, helping you visualize why you need to be smooth and how to be. Because spins happen so often on corner entry, and because corner entry is so often accompanied by slowing down, aka trail braking, then one way to make your car feel much more manageable is by adjusting the brake bias. Don't be put off doing this, it's really simple. You can, in most simulators, even change brake bias as you drive, and you can do it even in fixed setup series on iRacing at least. I've got a whole video on this, but long story short, brake bias has a huge impact on how a car behaves when trail braking. It's possible to completely tame an unruly, nervous car by adjusting it, so don't overlook it regardless of whether you're a beginner or experienced. If you drive an open setup series, there are a couple of tweaks that you can do that have a dramatic effect on the car's balance, making things much safer through corners. Usually I can calm a feisty setup down a bit if I either stiffen the front ARB, soften the rear ARB, lower the rear ride height, or add extra rear wing. If you have a setup that feels just a bit too wild, try changing those settings in tiny amounts until you're happy. Don't worry too much about the rest of the setup, remember you're just trying to keep things on the road, not set records. Most tweaks that make a car safer can reduce its maximum possible potential, but whatever results in you having much more confidence will usually lead you to be faster over a race. For example, stiffening the front ARB is one way of limiting the power of the front end, but it comes at the cost of making your car worse at going around corners. I'll often use a pre-made setup and make tiny tweaks of this nature to make the car safer or livelier, depending on how it feels in practice. Now to state the obvious, it's easier to feel the weight transfer that's so crucial to timing the squish phase and the squash phase if you have a stronger wheelbase. It's also much harder to be smooth and accurate when braking on lower end brake pedals. So if you're struggling with every corner being a bit hit and miss, it's probably not you, it's a kit. So let's just sum things up as we round out the video. The backbone of the lesson I'm trying to convey is let your car compress on turning with mild cornering forces, or as I call it, the squish. Then once the car has gotten settled into the turn, you can then wind the steering in properly and lean hard on the outside tyres, as I call it the squash. When you get used to it, it can be compared to how you would bank an aeroplane before it pulls hard turns, or leaning over on a motorbike before it curls into a corner. The same kind of initial compression occurs with cars, even if you can't really see it from the outside. Race cars love to turn, but it's your job to smoothly handle the transition from straight line to hard cornering. And that's it for now. I hope this gives you some fresh perspective to help you slice into corners with some extra confidence and awareness of how to keep the car happy on turning. Let me know what you think. Don't forget the 5% discount code DannyLee for everything at GT Omega. Leave a like and subscribe if you appreciate what I'm doing, and thanks to every one of you for doing so. Cheers.